listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you, and welcome to The Briefing. When Sussan Ley took over from Peter Dutton, some said she was marching onto a glass cliff, waiting to be pushed off. So, are we finally here? And who exactly is gearing up to make the move?
He certainly fits the bill, right? He served the country in the SAS. He's built as a man of principle, looks the part, has a bit of an action man vibe about him. He's 42, so he comes from the next generation as well.
Now, while Sussan Ley says she's not worried, that deep dive into Andrew Hastie and who could be pulling the strings to get him the top job is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spyrou. It's Tuesday, the 30th of September.
Hey Tara, and to you listening, we're starting in the US, where Donald Trump has just met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and they've agreed to a peace plan in Gaza.
So today is a historic day for peace, and I also want to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu for agreeing to the plan.
That's the US president speaking at the White House alongside Netanyahu there. And what we do know about the 20-point plan so far is that it'll begin with Gaza becoming a, quote, de-radicalized terror-free zone that depends on the return of hostages, destruction of Hamas tunnels and facilities, training of local police forces, and the phased withdrawal of Israeli forces.
The plan that we put forward today is focused on ending the war immediately, getting all of our hostages back, and creating conditions for durable Israeli security and Palestinian success.
Now, we also heard from Benjamin Netanyahu, who earlier in the day called Qatar's Prime Minister to apologise for violating its sovereignty when it struck a Hamas building in Doha earlier in the month. But he kicked off his part in this morning's press conference by praising Donald Trump.
While you focus at home on making America great again, your leadership abroad is changing the world for the better, ending wars and advancing peace.
He also gave us general indication as to who will be responsible for running the Palestinian territory under this new plan.
Gaza will be administered neither by Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority, but by those committed to a genuine peace with Israel.
Now, that is a position that's at odds with Australia, who just last week, alongside Canada, the UK and France and numerous others, formally recognised Palestinian statehood and that the region would be administered by the Palestinian Authority, Chris.
Yeah, and while his statement there is quite vague, looking at the plan itself, it does say that Gaza will be governed under a temporary transitional committee that'll feature qualified Palestinians and international experts, and that will be headed and chaired by a new international body of peace. Trump will be the chair of that body, and it'll involve other members and heads of states that are yet to be announced. But one of the names that it does include so far is former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. As to next steps, this will be put forward to Hamas for their agreement. Benjamin Netanyahu has said if they don't accept it peacefully, Israel will finish off the job in Gaza. Now, Tara, we have had multiple ceasefire deals, agreements, negotiations. All those things happen in the past. None of them have resulted in a peaceful end to this conflict. So it'll be very interesting to watch this space and see what unfolds in the next few days.
Back home now, where executives from Optus are set to meet with our communications minister by the end of tomorrow, following its latest outage over the weekend that led to 9 failed 000 calls in New South Wales. It came just 10 days after another major outage blocked around 600 emergency calls across the country and were linked to 3 deaths, which the telco has blamed on a routine update to its firewall.
The meeting with Annika Wells comes amid mounting pressure for the CEO of Optus to resign, as well as calls from opposition leader Sussan Ley, who we heard from yesterday.
We are calling for an independent inquiry into the whole 000 ecosystem. It isn't good enough that the minister responsible was swanning around in New York, was absent and appears missing in action on this critical matter where Australians who are relying on 000 have lost their lives.
Yes, and while this topic is a serious one, we're not making light of death in any shape, way or form, but I'm kind of over Sussan Ley using the phrase swanning around, Tara. I mean, we heard it over the weekend when she was talking about Albo in the UK, and while I enjoyed her use of the words swanning around there, in this one I'm kind of like, man, you know, Annika Wells was in the States. She was touting our social media ban. She was talking with world leaders about our world-leading social media ban. She was there for good reason. And, you know, now we do have this meeting. Whether or not this meeting has has arisen from pressure from the opposition or from other places is anyone's guess. But look, we have heard from telco experts who do say our emergency call network is outdated and incredibly vulnerable to human error and technical faults. So what they're hoping will come out of this meeting is that the government will use its immediate powers, and that includes intervention orders like appointing technical experts inside companies like Optus.
The AFL's first openly bisexual player, Mitch Brown, has called out Geelong Cats star Bailey Smith, labelling him a homophobic loser over a Mad Monday joke he posted to social media. Now, the players are known for dressing up as controversial moments from the season and the past news cycle, or just famous stars, for their post-season celebrations, with Bailey Smith going as Brad Pitt from the movie Legends of the Fall. But later in a social media post, he photographed himself being hugged from behind by skipper Patrick Dangerfield, who had dressed up as a character from Yellowstone, Chris, and basically they posted that photo with the caption, "Or Brokeback Mountain, depends how you look at it, and this is what losing your granny does to you." Granny meaning grand final.
Yes, and in response, Mitch Brown, a former West Coast Eagles player, posted to his Instagram story saying, quote, "Guys, do better. Last time I checked, losing a grand final doesn't make you gay, but being homophobic definitely makes you a loser." It comes after Brown went viral in recent months, becoming the first AFL player or former player to ever come out about their sexuality, with the footy code facing long-standing accusations of a homophobic and intolerant culture, which actually Helen Smith deep-dived in her episode of The Beefing last week. We'll pop a link to that in the show notes. Meanwhile, Bailey Smith's photo wasn't the only Mad Monday joke and dress-up to cause controversy, with 3 players attending as Irish rap group Kneecap, whose members recently had terror charges dropped. The group, who made headlines over their death to the IDF chant at Glastonbury, have been banned in 2 countries and were charged after waving a flag of Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, which has been ruled a terrorist organisation in Britain.
Aussies are being urged to immediately stop purchasing popular sleeping aid melatonin online, saying those who use it risk serious health problems. For the first time, the Therapeutic Goods Administration has issued a warning to consumers, saying that the product, which is commonly used by both kids and adults in Australia and abroad, should only be used with a GP prescription. Now, it says after testing various online brands, it found many that had as much as 4 times the amount of melatonin than was listed on labels, while others had significantly less or just no melatonin at all.
The TGA says if taken without medical oversight, melatonin can cause serious side effects, particularly in kids, including accidental overdose and hospitalisation. The product has surged in popularity in Australia and the US in recent years, with the regulator vowing to crack down on any unregulated imports, and even the Australian Border Force being ordered to destroy any that it finds. Now, the crackdown comes after the TGA conducted its own tests following a spike in melatonin overdoses, prompting one online retailer, iHerb, to suspend melatonin sales to Australia. The TGA says consumers shouldn't buy any health products from social media, unknown websites and other digital platforms. All advice, Tara Cassidy, that I have not followed.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this one concerns me a little bit because I know so many people that buy this stuff, like melatonin online specifically. I admit I've actually bought this myself, not knowing I was doing anything wrong.
Same.
But I just had trouble sleeping and I'd been told it works. And I actually only stopped, weirdly, because I had the most incredibly bad nightmares every time. And I would wake up with like sweats and in a panic. And I was like, oh, this is not suiting me, and stopped. And now I'm like, was I on my way to overdosing on melatonin? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I just batch bought my brother a few from, I think, the US. So I'm going to go home and check those labels this morning.
And an infamous Aussie pub that became the focal point of hit Netflix true crime series Last Stop Larrimah has been sold to a new owner.
Larrimah is a town of 11 people. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, Australia. There's no cell phone reception. There's really nothing aside from one pub and a pet crocodile.
Yes, the Larrimah Hotel, which became known around the world after that hit podcast series Lost in Larrimah and then later the Netflix series Last Stop Larrimah, basically showcased the mystery shrouding the remote Northern Territory town, centering around the suspicious disappearance of one of its own, Paddy Moriarty.
That's where Paddy used to live. That's where he went missing.
See you later, folks, and off he went.
Everyone in Larrimah was a suspect.
Perhaps Paddy was murdered and put into some pies.
What's stopping Barry from feeding him to the crocodile?
That's why the crocodile's fat.
The mystery has still never been solved, but the series has certainly brought a lot more visitors, with Paddy's disappearance drawing in curious travellers from all over, and the town now home to more than 20 people.
Oh, wow.
Yes, an uptick of 9 residents. Meanwhile, the 95-year-old pub at the heart of it all was listed for $795,000, inclusive of its 2 crocs named Sneaky Sam and Aggro.
Which, I mean, of course, you want with any of your pub purchases, 2 mighty crocs. Now, that brings our headlines to a close for today. Coming up next is your deep dive, Chris, looking into the mounting speculation that someone who's long been labelled a future PM is gunning for Sussan Ley's job, and which ex-PM could be helping him along the way. Have a listen to that up next.
When Sussan Ley stepped into the job of Liberal Party leader after Peter Dutton lost his seat at the federal election, the words glass and cliff dominated headlines. Glass ceiling, I was across, but glass cliff was a new one for me, and it refers to women or members of a minority group who are promoted to leadership positions in a time of crisis. And in keeping with the image of a cliff, these are leaders who are at an incredibly high risk of either falling or being pushed off the edge. Now, because we're talking Australian politics, the second is the more likely option here. And while a bunch of names have been thrown around since Sussan Ley took the top job, like Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price and Shadow Defence Minister Angus Taylor, there's one that's looking more and more likely to give her that little push.
Look, I support Sussan. Anyone who's speculating otherwise is being mischievous.
That's Andrew Hastie. He's 42, from Western Australia, is the current Shadow Home Affairs Minister, and has long been considered a future leader of the party since subbing out his Special Force camos for a suit in Canberra a decade ago. So what else do we know about Andrew Hastie? Is he really having a crack at the top job? And who exactly is helping him get there, and why? Charles Croucher is Nine's political editor and he joins me now. Charles, welcome back to the briefing. How sure are we that Andrew Hastie is gunning for Sussan Ley's job?
Oh, it's politics, right? So chances are someone is gunning for the top job of the party and therefore the top job of the country. It's not so much this is going to happen next week or even next month. But what Andrew Hastie has done in a few swift Instagram posts is position himself as either the natural successor or the natural alternative to Sussan Ley. He hasn't hidden away from his ambition, and it's nice to hear politicians be honest about that kind of thing. I think he's also aware of the situation in the party room. The numbers are tight. They were tight when Sussan Ley won the Liberal leadership and defeated Angus Taylor. They are tighter now. Andrew Hastie has been honest about his ambition. He is ideologically from a different faction to Sussan Ley, and that all points to something he doesn't have to say out loud. It all points to him being probably the person, if there is a person that challenges Sussan Ley at some stage, probably the person to do it.
You mentioned the factions there. What can you tell us about the faction that Hastie belongs to and where on the political spectrum he sits? I know last week's Instagram post gave us a pretty good indication, but can you tell us a little bit about that?
He's factionally aligned with the Conservative faction of the Liberal Party, not in the traditional sense because he has quite a unique background. He's coming from West Australia, which isn't something we associate with leaders of either party. Certainly only one Prime Minister, John Curtin, and many thought Kim Beazley would be the next, both Labor guys. So it's difficult from WA to become a leader. The tyranny of distance steps in there. Also his background as an SAS soldier. Whilst deeply respected throughout the parliament, there are many soldiers in the parliament from both sides of politics. There hasn't been a lot that have gone on to lead parties or lead the country. So this is another element about him, which is why he's been trying to broaden his horizons a bit. He was Shadow Defence Minister. Now he's gone to Shadow Home Affairs, similar to a defence portfolio, but trying to get into the domestic market and take on other issues that doesn't just make you the soldier. It shows some of the strength in other areas. So look, Conservative certainly came in to the parliament following the death of Don Randall. At that stage, Tony Abbott was Prime Minister. He wasn't Prime Minister for much longer. He's a big supporter of Andrew Hastie then. He is still a big supporter of Andrew Hastie now. And he'll be one of those that are rallying the troops around if that challenge comes up at some point.
When we've spoken about Andrew Hastie in the past, he's always been pitched to us as a future leader of the Liberal Party. My question for you, Charles, is who decides that and why? What characteristics do you have to be a quote-unquote future leader of the Liberal Party?
Well, look, he certainly fits the bill, right? He served the country in the SAS. I've spoken to those that served with him. They all most speak very highly of him. And he's built as a man of principle, looks the part, has a bit of an action man vibe about him. I remember him jumping on Instagram to challenge Richard Marles, the Defence Minister, to a chin-up competition at some point. I'm not sure how that benefits the Defence Force, but hey, it's there and doesn't hurt the action man persona either. And then it's just effectively not having any disqualifying features. He is someone who is well thought of. He thinks things through. He's deeply read, very professional and a good person to interact with, and certainly someone that I think Labor operatives have been speaking about for some time as being a potential problem for them in the future. The other thing he has done is won a seat of the by-election when the government was in a bit of trouble, held on to that seat, and really importantly at the last election, for those looking around for an electoral solution, he increased his margin. His two-party preferred vote went up around 5.5%. There weren't many people that had a swing towards them, certainly not a swing of 5.5% on the Liberal front bench. So that automatically then elevates him into that consideration. He's 42, so he comes from the next generation as well. And I think that's what some in the Liberal Party will look to.
Well, we'll backtrack to the week that was for Andrew Hastie. We mentioned his social media posts earlier. You know, just last week, he was still talking about wanting the coalition to dump its net zero targets. He was talking about being tougher on migration, you know, this idea that Australians feel like they don't belong in their own country. Then there were these pushes towards making Australia an industrial powerhouse again, as well as tributes to Charlie Kirk. Now, this is a very broad spectrum of topics that he covered, but they do have the through line of conservatism there. Why do you think he's doing that now?
Charlie Kirk was dictated by unfortunate circumstances with the assassination, clearly. The other things, though, I think he is trying to grab the issue before grabbing the leadership. Those issues are still unresolved in the Liberal Party. Sussan Ley bought herself time by saying we're going to kick the issue of net zero into the future months because putting Dan Tehan, someone widely respected across the Liberal parties in charge, Liberal and National parties in charge of a review. That review will come back with recommendations, and from there they'll formulate a policy. Well, in that vacuum of policy, Andrew Hastie has decided that he will take up that mantle and try and argue publicly that the way to improve electricity generation or prices or the Liberal Party fortunes is to ditch net zero. And he said that if it doesn't happen, if they continue with some kind of target, then he thinks he may be out of a job at some stage. He said he'd nailed his colours to the mast on that one. So what he has done effectively is try to drag the party outside of that review towards a position. Now, is it the Conservative position? Is it influenced by some of the populism around the world? Sure. That's also been the position he's had for some time now. This isn't a new feeling he's come up with. So he's trying to drag the issue there. And if he can get the party or the coalition to take on that belief or that position without being leader, then that's a great result for him because it keeps Sussan Ley in the top job. She's the one that has to cope with any negative reaction in the polls or take on the Labor machine that is really firing at the moment electorally. And he can stay there remaining the heir apparent at a time when it's not a real fun job being opposition leader. It's never a fun job when you've only got just a smidge over 40 seats in the parliament and against a dominant Labor Party, it's even less fun. And that's what Sussan Ley's facing at the moment.
When it comes to supporters, we'll talk about Andrew Hastie's supporters. We did see Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price get behind him and his views on immigration last week, as did Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister Michaelia Cash. Who else inside the Liberal Party is supporting Hastie at the moment?
Senator James Paterson is someone who is well in depth in the Liberal Party machinery. The others is a factional divide along the lines of Conservatives and moderates and the centre-right faction that is largely controlled by Alex Hawke. It was Scott Morrison's old faction that sort of sits in the middle and is guiding power to Sussan Ley at the moment inside the Liberal Party, which makes him such a prominent player and also brings in all kinds of state fights that go on around the place. Strangely, the one place that Andrew Hastie will need support from and may find it harder than others is Western Australia, is his home state. It's a place that is largely dominated by one media outlet, that is the Seven West juggernaut over there, and there's been some friction between Andrew Hastie and those in power at Seven West. That's also a place where the Liberal Party have lost a huge amount of seats in the last 2 elections, something that delivered Anthony Albanese his majority last time around and just got worse at the last election for the Liberal Party in the West. So that's part of, I guess, his pitch, if it comes to that. The thing to look for, and I'm talking politically and figuratively here, because I know it's been a time of sort of serious political violence. I don't want to use crass analogies, but assassins of leaders rarely work alone. They always have an accomplice. Look for who's starting to make noise on the fringes. I don't think it's going to be Andrew Hastie that puts his hand up and challenges Sussan Ley. If that is to happen, it will be someone else, a stalking horse, they call them in Britain, someone else that says enough is enough. Now, it may be a policy issue, be it net zero, be it an immigration target, any other thing that is bubbling along, or it may just be the time of the year. The last parliamentary sitting week is always the dangerous time for a leader, particularly an unpopular leader. That will be the last week of November. I'm sort of very mindful that it was the end of November, early December, when Tony Abbott challenged Malcolm Turnbull all the way back in 2009 to take on the leadership of the Liberal Party. But there's time is not a factor at the moment. There's still 2.5 years until the election. The party is still working out its policies. That might be the lightning rod. If the policy goes against the way the Conservatives want and the way that Andrew Hastie wants, it may be something else. And Sussan Ley continues because there is an opportunity cost of dragging down a leader, particularly the first woman to lead the Liberal Party, and particularly someone with a power base that is based around pretty populous states of New South Wales and Victoria, the 2 most populous states and the 2 states where the Liberal Party need to get back on track if they're ever going to get back into power.
Charles Croucher, thanks for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks so much.
That was Nine's political editor Charles Croucher speaking with me there, and that is it for this episode of The Briefing. If you found it interesting or you learned something new, why not flick it over to a mate? I'm Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.